Alright, we're talking about parts of congruent triangles today. Congruent figures are figures that have the same shape and the same size. And for congruent triangles, that means that all their corresponding parts are congruent. What gives them the same shape is that all their corresponding angles are congruent. And what gives them the same size is that all the corresponding sides are congruent. Now, the idea that all the corresponding parts are congruent is known as CPCTC, and we'll use this when we get into proofs later on. CPCTC stands for corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Alright, when we look at example 1, it tells us that if triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF, then, and we're going to list all the angles that are congruent and all the sides that are congruent. Now, you can tell a lot from a congruent statement. When you have a statement that says these two triangles are congruent, they have to give those triangles in corresponding order. So, the first letter in this name has to correspond with the first letter in this name. So I know that angle A has to be congruent to angle D. The second letter in this name corresponds with the second letter in the other name. So I know that angle B and E are going to be congruent. And then the last letter in this name corresponds with the last letter in the other name. So angles C and F are going to be congruent. And you can do the same basic thing for the sides as well. Line segment AB is the first two letters of this name, so it'll correspond with the segment created by the first two letters in this name. Line segment DE. Line segment BC is created with the last two letters in this name, so it's going to correspond with the segment created by the last two letters in this name. So line segment EF. And then line segment AC, A and C are the first and last letters, so it's going to correspond with DF. Line segment DF. And notice I did all of that without looking at the picture at all. Now I can mark the picture to show these things are congruent. Angle A is congruent to angle D. Angle B is congruent to angle E, and angle C is congruent to angle F. Then our sides, line segment AB is congruent to line segment DE. Line segment BC is congruent to line segment EF. And line segment AC is congruent to line segment DF. These are congruent triangles. Their corresponding parts are congruent, both angles and sides, and the congruent statement has to be written in corresponding order. Alright, so let's look at example 2. It says if triangle XYZ is congruent to triangle WMN, then determine whether the following statements are true or false. Now, when you write the names of triangles, there's no particular order that the three letters have to go in when you write the name of a triangle. So we could write this a few different ways, but once you've decided what order the letters in that first triangle go in, that determines what the order has to be for the second one, because again, I told you that these congruent statements, the names of the triangles are written in corresponding order. So when I'm looking at this right here, I know that angle X is going to be congruent to angle W. Angle Y is congruent to angle M. Angle Z is going to be congruent to angle N, and so forth. So we can reorder the letters for triangle XYZ, but if we do, we have to reorder the letters for triangle WMN to correspond correctly. So let's see which ones would be true statements and which ones would be false statements. Alright, triangle YZX is congruent to triangle WMN. Let's make sure that the same angles still correspond with each other. Y should correspond with M. Does Y correspond with M? No. So that's already a problem. These are not in corresponding order, so this is a false statement. Let's check the next one. Z is the first letter here. They've got it corresponding with N. Is that correct? Z corresponds with N. Yep. X and W. X and W. Yep. Y and M. Y and M. Yep, this is true. So while they reordered the letters, they reordered the letters in the second triangle to match, to Keep that corresponding order. Alright, let's see. Y is corresponding with N. Y is not corresponding with N up here, so they've changed things up to where it's no longer a true statement. Those are not in corresponding order like they're supposed to be. Z and N. Z and N. Yep. Y and M. Y and M. X and W. X and W. Everything is still corresponding with the same parts. So even though it's been written in a different order, this is a true statement. So these were two other ways we could have written this exact same congruent statement and given the exact same information, just making it look a little different by putting them in different order. But A and C, not the same information. So those are not true. Alright, let's look at examples 3 and 4. It says, use the given figure and information to name 3 pairs of congruent angles and 3 pairs of congruent sides. Now, I will strongly encourage you to identify the congruent parts based on the congruent statement, because it will be the same every single time. Some kids like to use the pictures, and sometimes you can use the pictures and do just fine. But sometimes the pictures can be confusing and misleading, and you might think different things correspond than what really do correspond. But the congruent statement is never going to lead you astray. The congruent statement is always going to have them in corresponding order. So I'm basically ignoring the picture for now. I'll go back and mark those congruent later so we can have a visual. But I'm doing everything off the congruent statement. Angle E corresponds with angle K, first letter and first letter. Angle H corresponds with angle F, second letter and second letter. And angle G corresponds with angle G. Now the one thing you do need the picture for, okay, we do need to check the picture for, is sometimes you can't name an angle with just one letter. At point E here, there's only one angle. So if I say angle E, we know exactly which angle I'm referring to. But when it comes to G, there's more than one angle at that point, right? So you do if there's a letter that's being shared. I noticed that G is in both triangles. Then there's going to be more than one angle at that point. I have to name these angles with 3 letters now. So in triangle EHG, angle G is this angle right here. This angle right here. So the name of that angle would be angle EGH. And in triangle KFG, angle G is right here, and that would be angle FGK. So when it's one of those where it's the same letter for both triangles, you got to make sure to go back and name it with 3 letters. So angle E is congruent to angle K. Angle H is congruent to angle F. And we already talked about our 2 angles here at G, angle EGH and angle FGK. Alright, those are all the angles that are congruent. Now we still have sides that are congruent. First 2 letters, first 2 letters. Line segment EH is congruent to line segment KF. Okay, last 2 letters, last 2 letters. Line segment HG is going to correspond with line segment FG, so those are going to be congruent. And then you always have the segment created by the first and last. So we got line segment EG is congruent to line segment KG. And let's mark those in the picture so we can see that. Line segment EH congruent to line segment KF. Line segment HG congruent to line segment FG. And line segment EG congruent to line segment KG. Alright, let's do the same thing on the next one. Alright, now notice that A is repeated. So that's where we're going to have to name angles with 3 letters. Notice that C is repeated. So we're going to have to name those angles with 3 letters. The only ones we can name without 3 letters, angle B and angle D. Now you can still name those with 3 letters as well, but we can be lazy and we can name those with just 1 letter each. So let's start with the first one in each. So in triangle ABC, angle A is referring to this angle, which would be angle BAC. And angle C in this triangle, triangle CDA, this triangle, angle C is referring to this angle, which would be angle DCA. Okay, the second angle in each one, B and D. And these are ones that we can actually name lazily because B is there's only one angle at B and only one angle at the vertex D, so we can just say angle B is congruent to angle D. I'm going to mark those congruent in the picture. And then angle C congruent to angle A. And that C comes from triangle ABC, so it's referring to this angle, which is angle BCA. And then that's congruent to angle A from triangle CDA, so that's referring to this angle, which is angle DAC. So there's all of our congruent angles. Let's list the congruent sides. Sides are a little less complicated. First two letters. Line segment AB is congruent to line segment CD. AB congruent to CD. Last two letters, BC, DA. Line segment BC is congruent to line segment DA. Line segment BC congruent to line segment DA. And then first and last letters, AC, line segment AC is congruent to line segment CA. Now, remember when we name line segments, the order of the two letters does not matter. So line segment AC and line segment CA are the same segment, and you'll notice that when you look at the picture, line segment AC or CA, whichever one you want to call it, it's the same segment being shared by both triangles. It's the side length for both. That is your third pair of congruent sides. Think about the reflexive property. That's what we got going on right there. Alright, example 5. Using the diagram, complete the congruent statement. So we want to write this congruent statement. Remember, it's got to go in corresponding order. So since they named the first triangle ABC, when I name the second triangle, I need that first letter to correspond with A. A is the right angle. The right angle in this triangle is D. So A and D are going to correspond. So D needs to be the first letter in the name. B is the second letter. Angle B is congruent to angle E. So E needs to be the second letter because those are corresponding angles. And then angle C corresponds with angle F. So C and F need to correspond. Since C went last, F will go last. Alright, what information about the triangle is shown in these drawings? Now notice it says shown. So there's some other information we could figure out is true. But it specifically wants us just to write down what we see in the picture. I see several things marked congruent. I see angle D marked congruent to angle U. I see angle K is congruent to angle L. Then I see line segment DW is congruent to line segment AU. Now finally, see these segments are congruent. Line segment KW is congruent to line segment LU. This is just making sure we're understanding the marks and things that are on the picture and what they mean. All of those markings in the picture mean this information over here is true. They're marking all those angles and sides congruent for us. Alright, last one, guys. Example 7. If triangle DOG is congruent to triangle CAT, and they give us the lengths of some sides, and we want to solve for x. Now remember, if these triangles are congruent, all their corresponding parts are congruent. So if I'm solving for x, obviously I got to use this when I'm setting up an equation. It's the only thing that has x in it. Well, line segment AT is the last two letters of this name, so it's got to correspond with OG. Line segment OG. Well, in congruent triangles, corresponding parts are congruent. So AT and OG, those got to be congruent to each other. And when things are congruent, that means they have equal measures. So anytime we know things are congruent, we set them equal to each other. So we're just going to say 2x plus 6 is equal to 12. Why do we have this other stuff in here? That's just extra information you don't need to throw you off to see if you could figure out what corresponds with what so you could set up the equation correctly. So we don't need that other information there. Solve for x. Subtract the 6. Divide off the 2. And we find out that x is 3.